So I sat down on the train, and so I sat on the edge of one seat, and across the aisle from me was a man and a woman. And from memory, they were fighting about their relationship. She was saying, "I can't do this anymore," and he was getting really angry at her for saying that. He was kind of big, sort of bullish looking. He was wearing a leather jacket. She's harder to remember. She was smaller than him. She looked worn out. She looked like maybe she had some drug problems. I don't know. She had sort of this like...
Haggard.
Yeah, haggard sort of look. She was quite lined and tired. I think the big question for me was like, how does one act in that situation? I'd just never been in a situation where I'd so obviously was bearing witness to something that was wrong. But there was also this like threat on me, and he sort of kept having these sort of seizures of anger that he was really struggling to control. Like the first place that it came across was in his face, you know, like his eyes were sort of like, his nose flared and like that kind of thing. And then he would sort of, it seemed almost uncontrollable, he would sort of lean over and sort of slap her on the leg, and it was like he really had this rushing urge to hurt her.
So he was controlling it to an extent.
He was trying to control it. But I think the other thing it made me think about was like our relationship.
What, all the times that I bet you?
No, not at all. But like, I mean, it's like so different from our relationship, but it made me think about, you know, does that seed lie in every heterosexual male-female relationship?
I guess there's the physical capacity.
And it's like at that point that I started to feel sort of uncomfortable, but also just like, I have to keep watching this because I don't know what's going to happen.
If something horrible happens, crying is not a masculine response.
No.
Dealing with the situation is a masculine response. If someone attacks you, running away is not a masculine response. Fighting, you know what I mean? Like, this is the kind of messages, as in, like, it's not...
Yeah. And anyway, there was this point, and I can't quite remember where it happened, but there was this point where he suddenly, like, turned to me and realised that I was watching them. I think he said something to me, like, he sort of turned around and he said, "What are you looking at?" And I don't know, I think that moment was a bit like, shit. And I didn't know whether I should say something or not. And I think in the end I said nothing. But I just looked at him in the eyes to let him know that that wasn't true and I was going to keep watching. Do you feel like you have that you've been taught that because you're a man you should have control and power in like most social situations?
I don't know. I think these messages are not explicit.
What I think about with you is like when you have had something kind of shit happening to you, like say that thing with your friend where your friend didn't want to be friends anymore. And the way that manifested in you in this heat of the moment was this need to throw things.
I was crying though. But yeah, no, I do get a violent impulse. But it's never been directed towards anyone, ever.
What does that feel like when that happens?
Overwhelmed. Quite vulnerable as well. At that time I punched the wall, that was definitely... it was either burst into tears or punch a wall.
And so their fight kept escalating. And I think they got to the tram stop that their house was at, and she said, "I'm not getting off. I'm not getting off." And he sort of stood up. He was so aggravated, and he sort of stood up, sort of almost got off the tram, but then he didn't. He came back and he sat back down. But it's interesting for me watching that because it's so far away from the way I react to situations. That's a lie. That is a lie. I have had that feeling, but not the same.
What's your experience of that?
When I was a teenager, like I sort of like went through a rough patch with my mum, and sometimes when I would walk past her in the hallway, I would just have this
Hip and shoulder.
I would just bash her on the side, like with the side of my body as I walked
you're
past
so
her.
gentle, you fragile flower.
Yes, and like that was like this deep anger, like I just needed to...
See, that's pretty testosterone-y.
It is, yeah. It's so hard to remember. I just have these big blank... The whole thing just happened so quickly. But I think he punched her on her shoulder. at that point, and I was just like, oh my god, oh my god.
So, what about... Here's a hard question. How about you? How you say you want more assertive kind of violent sex sometimes? How's that sit with gender roles?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like before I dated you, I think I was much more attracted towards people who weren't physically mean to me, but like who weren't very nice to me. For me, it was often like quite a self-destructive thing of like always going for people who I knew could never love me properly, or really probably never love me. And it sort of fulfilled this idea of myself where I thought I was worthless. But it's also very subtle, and often like you don't know that it's happening until you suddenly realise that you're upset. I gave you a hickey.
Did ya?
Yeah. You suddenly realise
Violence.
that you suddenly realise that that you are completely obsessed with someone who is never going to love you, never going to treat you particularly well. And eventually what happened was he just sort of suddenly grabbed the side of her head and smashed her head against the window.
Oh.
And then I shouted, "Hey, hey, hey!" And he turned around and he came up to my face, like
close.
nose to nose. Eyes were in, he was sort of like,
Jeez.
and I just looked at him, and then he looked around, and I think he realised that everyone was watching now, and he got off the train. And then we all turned to her, and she was bleeding like profusely out of the side of her head. So one person went to tell the train driver that they need to stop the train, and the guy next to me called the police. I went and sat with her, and she was crying and crying and crying. And then the police came on the train eventually, and she showed them this card that said she had multiple sclerosis, which explained why she was bleeding so much as well, because she was just like already quite weak. And I remember she wouldn't tell them what his name was. The police talked to me and the guy in the suit, and basically told us that like they couldn't press charges because she wasn't saying who he was. I think I remember having some sort of conversation with her before she got off the train where I sort of said that you don't deserve that kind of thing. But it's easy for me to say that because it's what I've been told my whole life.
No, it's her right. It's a right to safety.
Then the train driver came out and he put sand over the blood on the floor.
Oh, I have sand.
I have sand. He had a big bag of sand and he poured it all over the blood to absorb it. And then the train kept going. I don't know, I think it did make me think about my own relationship and how far away our relationship feels from that kind of thing. But also just like, I think that so much of that stuff that was playing out in front of me is always in like male-female relationships. And then I got off at my stop, which was actually just one stop away from where it all happened. And I remember just like bursting into tears.
Then you called me.
And then I called you.